The first thing you need to notice is not the idea of someone reaching out, but the way your attention sharpened when you read that line. There was no excitement rush. It was more like alertness. Like something inside you straightened up. That reaction matters, because it means this isn't landing as fantasy. It's landing as relevance. This part begins right there, in that internal shift where you sense that something is changing, even before you can explain how. There's a big difference between casual contact and serious reach. Casual contact is light, inconsistent, and often rooted in comfort or curiosity. Serious reach comes from decision. And decision is not emotional. It's grounded. It's what happens after someone has sat with themselves long enough to stop avoiding what they know is true. What's happening right now didn't start today. It didn't start when you noticed signs or felt a pull. It started earlier, quietly, when your soulmate reached a point where distraction stopped working. Where staying busy didn't silence the internal questions anymore. Where avoiding depth felt heavier than facing it. You might not have seen this phase from the outside. From the outside, it may have looked like distance. Or silence. Or nothing at all. But internally, something was reorganizing. And internal reorganizations are never loud. They're slow. They're serious. And they don't reverse easily. Your soulmate has been coming to terms with something specific. Not just missing you, not just thinking about you, but recognizing the weight of what was left unsaid, unresolved, or mishandled. Recognition is different from nostalgia. Nostalgia looks backward. Recognition looks inward. And when someone reaches recognition, the way they reach out changes. This isn't about testing the waters. This isn't about seeing if you're still available. This isn't about easing guilt. A serious reach doesn't come from impulse. It comes from responsibility. Responsibility for how something ended. Responsibility for what was avoided. Responsibility for the truth they didn't have the courage to speak before. You may have felt this building as a subtle pressure rather than a sign. A sense that something unfinished was moving closer to the surface. Not in a dramatic way. In a focused way. Almost like life was narrowing in on one conversation, one acknowledgement, one necessary moment. That narrowing happens when avoidance runs out of room. Your soulmate didn't arrive here easily. They questioned themselves. They justified delays. They told themselves it was better to leave things alone. But the more they tried to move forward without addressing what happened, the more obvious it became that something essential was unresolved. This is the part people misunderstand. Serious reach doesn't come from sudden emotion. It comes from failed suppression. From realizing that no matter what else you build, what you don't resolve keeps influencing everything quietly. You mattered in a way that couldn't be buried. And here's the part that requires your attention, not emotionally, but internally. This reach is not meant to pull you back into old patterns. It's not asking you to wait. It's not asking you to fill gaps or interpret signals. It's asking you to stay grounded in who you are now. Because you're not the same person you were when this connection paused. You're more settled. More self-aware. Less willing to live in ambiguity. You don't romanticize inconsistency anymore. You don't chase clarity. You expect it. That change matters more than anything they might say. Your soulmate feels that difference. That's part of why the reach is serious. Casual reach assumes access. Serious reach respects distance. It comes with awareness that the dynamic has shifted, and that if anything is addressed now, it has to be done differently. You may notice that the energy around this doesn't feel urgent. There's no panic attached to it. It feels deliberate. Almost careful. That's because this isn't about re-entering your life recklessly. It's about approaching a truth that can't be ignored anymore. Pay attention to what doesn't feel familiar this time. The tone is different. The timing is different. The intention is different. This isn't about reopening something lightly. It's about acknowledging something honestly. And here's the most important part. You don't need to do anything yet. Serious reach doesn't require immediate response. It requires presence. It requires you to stay connected to your own clarity instead of slipping back into anticipation. If contact happens, it will come with weight. Not emotional weight. Intentional weight. You'll feel it in how direct it is. In how little guesswork it requires. In how it doesn't ask you to carry the emotional load for both sides. If it doesn't happen immediately, that doesn't mean it isn't real. Serious decisions often take time to translate into action. Especially when someone is choosing integrity over comfort for the first time in a long while. What matters is that you don't interpret this moment through the lens of the past. The past was shaped by hesitation. This moment is shaped by resolve. And resolve doesn't rush. It moves when it's ready to stand behind itself. You may feel a temptation to lean forward emotionally, to prepare, to imagine conversations. Resist that. Not because you're guarded, but because you're grounded. Let actions meet you where you are now, not where you used to be. This is not about proving anything. Not about fixing. Not about reopening wounds. It's about truth stepping out of avoidance and into accountability. And accountability changes everything. Stay attentive, but stay rooted. Stay open, but stay self-honoring. Whatever unfolds next will not require you to abandon yourself to understand it. If this message landed with seriousness rather than excitement, that's exactly how it was meant to land. Serious shifts don't create adrenaline. They create clarity. If you want to continue with this series, you can like, share, or subscribe. Not because you're waiting for something to happen, but because you recognize when something meaningful is aligning quietly, asking you to stay present instead of reactive. What comes next will reveal itself through consistency, not promises. Through intention, not intensity. And you'll know the difference now. There's a different kind of awareness that settles in after you accept that something serious is unfolding. It's not excitement. It's not anxiety either. It's attentiveness. Like you're listening more closely to your own life instead of scanning for signs outside of it. This part begins in that attentiveness, because when something real is approaching, your intuition doesn't rush, it sharpens. What your soulmate is moving toward now didn't come from a single moment of realization. It came from accumulation. From too many nights where distraction stopped working. From too many situations where moving on felt forced instead of natural. From noticing that no matter what they tried to build next, something unresolved kept casting a shadow over it. People don't reach out seriously when they're lonely. Loneliness looks for comfort. Seriousness looks for truth. Your soulmate has been confronting a version of themselves they avoided for a long time. The version that knows exactly where things went unfinished. The version that understands that silence didn't protect anyone in the end. And sitting with that understanding wasn't easy for them. It required honesty without self-justification. There were moments when they told themselves it was too late. That too much time had passed. That reopening anything would only complicate life. But those thoughts didn't bring peace. They brought restlessness. And restlessness is the body's way of saying something important hasn't been addressed. This is why the energy around this reach feels different from before. Before, there may have been hesitation masked as timing. Now, there is deliberation. Deliberation is slower, but it's heavier. It carries responsibility. You might not see this process outwardly. From the outside, it may look like nothing is happening. But internally, your soulmate has been revisiting moments they once brushed past. Conversations that ended too soon. Truths that stayed half-formed. Choices made to preserve comfort rather than alignment. And here's something important. This isn't about regret in the dramatic sense. It's about reckoning. Reckoning is quieter. It doesn't collapse a person emotionally. It steadies them enough to face what they avoided. Your soulmate isn't reaching out to undo the past. They're reaching out because they can no longer live as if the past didn't matter. That distinction matters. You may feel this as a subtle shift in your own emotional field. Less pull toward imagining outcomes. Less urgency to prepare responses. More curiosity about how things will reveal themselves. That's not detachment. That's readiness without desperation. You're not waiting the way you once did. And that's why this moment is safe. In the past, a reach like this might have thrown you off balance. It might have sent you spiraling into hope or fear. Now, you're steadier. You know what it feels like to be half-met. You know what it costs to stay in ambiguity. You're no longer willing to abandon yourself to keep a connection alive. Your soulmate senses that shift too. That's part of what makes this reach serious. They know they can't approach you the same way as before. Casual words won't land. Vague intentions won't be enough. This time, if they speak, it has to come with clarity. And clarity requires courage. Courage isn't loud. It's quiet resolve. It's choosing to speak even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. It's accepting responsibility without knowing how it will be received. This reach is rooted in that kind of courage. There's also something else happening that doesn't get talked about often. Your soulmate has been noticing the difference between missing you and respecting you. Missing you was easy. Respecting what they lost access to was harder. That respect is what matured the feeling into something serious. They're not reaching out because they want reassurance. They're reaching out because they want to be honest. Honesty doesn't rush. It waits until it can stand on its own. For you, the most important thing right now is not to interpret silence as absence or movement as promise. Let whatever comes arrive fully formed. Let words be supported by behavior. Let consistency do the talking. You don't need to brace yourself. You don't need to rehearse conversations. You don't need to soften your boundaries in advance. Stay where you are. Grounded. Observant. Self-honoring. If contact happens, you'll recognize it not by how emotional it feels, but by how little guesswork it requires. Serious reach doesn't confuse. It clarifies. It doesn't ask you to fill gaps. It fills them itself. And if it takes time, that doesn't invalidate what's unfolding. Serious decisions often move slowly because they're not fueled by impulse. They're fueled by accountability. This part of the story isn't about reunion or outcome. It's about integrity entering the space where avoidance used to live. And integrity changes dynamics whether they continue or not. You're no longer positioned as someone waiting to be chosen. You're positioned as someone who will only engage with what meets you honestly. That shift protects you regardless of what happens next. There's a calm authority in that position. You may notice that you're more selective with your attention now. You're not chasing meaning. You're allowing it to reveal itself. That doesn't make you passive. It makes you discerning. Whatever your soulmate chooses to do next will reflect where they truly are. And you don't need to control that. You only need to observe whether it aligns with who you've become. This moment is not fragile. It doesn't need to be handled carefully. It needs to be handled honestly. Stay present. Stay rooted. Stay open without leaning forward. If this part felt steady rather than dramatic, that's intentional. Serious shifts don't create emotional spikes. They create grounding. And if you continue with this series, it won't be because you're waiting for someone to reach out. It will be because you recognize when truth is moving toward you with weight, clarity, and intention. Whatever unfolds next will meet you where you stand now, not where you used to be. And that makes all the difference. There's a quiet tension that appears right before something serious comes into form. Not anxiety, not excitement, but a kind of internal stillness where you feel alert without being restless. You might notice yourself slowing down in small ways. Pausing longer before responding to things. Being more aware of your surroundings. This part begins in that subtle shift, because seriousness doesn't announce itself loudly. It gathers itself first. What your soulmate is moving through now is not confusion anymore. Confusion is noisy. This is clarity in progress. Clarity doesn't rush forward, it organizes itself. It looks back carefully, not to relive the past, but to understand it without distortion. And that's exactly where they are. They've reached a point where pretending something didn't matter takes more energy than admitting it did. That's a hard place to arrive at, especially for someone who learned to cope by staying emotionally contained. For a long time, they told themselves they handled things well. That silence was maturity. That moving on without explanation was strength. But that story stopped holding up under closer inspection. Because strength that avoids truth eventually collapses inward. Your soulmate has been noticing patterns repeating in their life. Not dramatic failures, but subtle dissatisfaction. Connections that never fully land. Conversations that stay on the surface. Moments where something feels missing even when everything looks fine. Those moments didn't point to you directly at first. They pointed inward. Toward a truth they kept stepping around. That truth is this: unresolved connections don't disappear. They go underground. And underground things influence everything quietly. This realization didn't happen all at once. It came in fragments. In comparisons they didn't mean to make. In moments where someone else's presence didn't feel enough. In the uncomfortable awareness that what they once walked away from had more substance than what they tried to replace it with. That awareness matured into seriousness. Seriousness isn't emotional. It's sober. It doesn't fantasize about outcomes. It focuses on responsibility. And responsibility asks a difficult question: what was my role in how this ended? Your soulmate is finally answering that honestly. Not blaming you. Not blaming themselves excessively. Simply acknowledging that they avoided something real because they weren't ready to face the implications. Facing it now doesn't guarantee anything. But avoiding it guarantees stagnation. And stagnation has become intolerable. This is why the reach feels different this time. It's not driven by missing you in moments of loneliness. It's driven by wanting to stand on solid ground again. To live without unfinished emotional business influencing every choice in the background. You may feel this as a shift in your own emotional state. Not a pull, but an openness. Not anticipation, but readiness. The difference matters. Anticipation leans forward. Readiness stands still. You're standing still now. That's not because you don't care. It's because you care differently. You've learned what it costs to lean forward without reciprocity. You've learned how easy it is to abandon yourself subtly. And you've chosen not to do that again. Your soulmate knows this, even if they don't consciously articulate it. They sense that access to you is no longer automatic. That whatever happens next has to be earned through clarity, not assumed through history. That realization is sobering. It means that reaching out is no longer about relief. It's about accountability. Accountability requires someone to be prepared for any outcome, not just the one they hope for. That preparation is what makes the reach serious. They've been asking themselves difficult questions. What am I actually prepared to offer now? Not what do I feel, but what can I sustain? What patterns am I willing to change, not temporarily, but consistently? What truths am I willing to live by even if it makes things uncomfortable? Those questions don't get answered quickly. They demand alignment between intention and action. And that alignment is forming slowly, deliberately. You don't need to monitor this process. You don't need to sense it constantly. The work here is not vigilance. It's presence. Presence in your own life. In your own routines. In your own growth. The more present you are with yourself, the clearer everything else becomes. You might notice that you're less reactive to uncertainty now. Silence doesn't send you spiraling. Delay doesn't feel personal. You trust that whatever is meant to be addressed will be addressed directly, or not at all. And either outcome feels survivable. That's strength. Your soulmate's seriousness is being shaped by that strength. Not because you're withholding, but because you're grounded. Grounded people change the dynamics around them without saying a word. If contact comes, it will feel heavier than before. Not dramatic, but intentional. You won't need to read between lines. You won't need to guess at subtext. Serious reach respects clarity because it's born from it. And if contact doesn't come immediately, don't interpret that as hesitation. Sometimes seriousness takes time to translate into action because the person wants to be sure they can stand behind what they say. Especially when they know they don't get infinite chances. This moment isn't fragile. It doesn't need protection. It needs honesty. And honesty doesn't require you to prepare emotionally in advance. It requires you to stay aligned with who you are now. Someone who values clarity. Someone who doesn't chase. Someone who can listen without abandoning themselves. Whatever unfolds next will meet that version of you. This part of the story isn't about outcome. It's about positioning. You're positioned differently now. You're not waiting to be chosen. You're open to what's aligned and uninterested in what isn't. That position gives you leverage without effort. You may feel a calm confidence growing underneath everything. Not excitement. Not certainty. Just trust. Trust that you'll recognize truth when it shows up. Trust that you won't betray yourself to keep a connection alive. Trust that you can handle whatever clarity brings. That trust is what allows seriousness to meet seriousness. As this part settles, don't rush to label anything. Let it breathe. Let it unfold. Let actions speak when they're ready. If this message felt steady and grounded rather than emotionally charged, that's intentional. Serious shifts don't overwhelm. They clarify. And if you continue with this series, it won't be because you're hoping for contact. It will be because you recognize the difference between attention-seeking messages and truth moving quietly into alignment. What's forming now doesn't need your anticipation. It needs your presence. There's a moment when you catch yourself doing something differently without realizing it at first. You respond more slowly. You don't rush to conclusions. You don't fill silence just to make it disappear. And then it hits you that this isn't hesitation. It's self-trust. This part begins in that realization, because self-trust changes the entire direction of how anything serious can approach you. What's unfolding now isn't driven by emotion alone. Emotion is reactive. This is shaped by recognition. Your soulmate is no longer circling the same internal questions. They're no longer debating whether something mattered. That phase has already passed. What they're facing now is the consequence of knowing something mattered and choosing whether they're willing to honor that truth in action. There's a quiet seriousness in that place. It strips away excuses. It removes the comfort of ambiguity. It asks a simple but heavy question. Am I willing to show up differently than before? Or am I willing to live with the cost of not doing so? That question doesn't create panic. It creates focus. Your soulmate has reached a point where avoiding the truth feels heavier than facing it. That's not because life suddenly became unbearable, but because something inside them matured. Maturity doesn't always feel empowering. Sometimes it feels sobering. Like realizing you can't keep telling the same story about yourself and still move forward with integrity. They've been seeing how avoidance shaped their past choices. Not just with you, but across their life. How stepping back instead of speaking up became a pattern. How delaying clarity became a habit. How silence was used as a way to stay comfortable rather than honest. Seeing that pattern clearly is uncomfortable, but it's also irreversible. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is why the energy around this moment feels grounded instead of emotional. There's no fantasy here. No idealized reunion playing in the background. Just a recognition that something was left incomplete, and that incompletion has consequences. You might sense this shift without knowing why. Not as longing, but as awareness. Almost like your intuition is awake without being loud. That's because your own position has changed too. You're no longer oriented around waiting. You're oriented around alignment. That matters more than anything your soulmate might do next. In the past, a serious reach might have felt destabilizing. It might have pulled you back into old dynamics. Now, you're steady enough to let whatever happens meet you where you stand. You're not trying to control the outcome. You're observing whether the approach aligns with the clarity you've built. That's not detachment. That's discernment. Your soulmate feels that difference. They know they can't approach casually anymore. Casual reach assumes access without accountability. Serious reach understands that access is earned through consistency and truth. That awareness changes how someone prepares to speak. They're not just thinking about what they feel. They're thinking about what they can sustain. Not just what they want to say, but what they're willing to live by after saying it. That shift from feeling to responsibility is what makes this moment significant. Responsibility isn't romantic. It's real. There's also a layer of humility forming in them now. Humility isn't self-blame. It's the willingness to admit that avoiding something real doesn't make it disappear. It only delays the reckoning. And delay has its own cost. They're aware now that time didn't make this easier. It made it clearer. That clarity doesn't demand immediate action, but it does demand honesty. And honesty has a way of surfacing when it's ready, not when it's convenient. For you, this part is about staying anchored in your own life. Not pulling away. Not leaning forward. Just staying present. Letting whatever is serious enough reveal itself without you having to chase it. You've already learned what chasing costs. You might notice that your emotional baseline is calmer now. You don't feel the same spikes of hope or disappointment. That calm isn't indifference. It's confidence. Confidence that you can handle truth without losing yourself. Confidence that you don't need to be chosen to be worthy of clarity. That confidence changes how seriousness meets you. If contact happens, it will feel different because you'll feel different. You won't feel the urge to rush, to soften, to over-explain. You'll listen. You'll observe. You'll notice whether words and energy align. And you'll trust yourself to respond from that place, not from fear of loss. If contact doesn't happen yet, that doesn't pull you backward. You don't fill the gap with stories. You don't interpret delay as rejection. You let time reveal what's real. That patience isn't passive. It's powerful. Your soulmate's seriousness isn't about reclaiming the past. It's about correcting a pattern. And patterns don't correct themselves through emotion. They correct through consistent choice. That's what's being formed now. You may sense moments of reflection that don't belong to you but pass through your awareness anyway. Moments where you feel neutral instead of reactive. That neutrality is a sign that you're no longer entangled in outcome. You're available to truth, not attached to a specific result. That's the safest place to be when something serious approaches. This part of the story isn't asking you to prepare. It's asking you to remain aligned. To keep choosing yourself in small ways. To keep honoring your boundaries without announcing them. To keep living your life fully instead of pausing it for possibility. Alignment does the work for you. Whatever unfolds next will have to meet the version of you that doesn't negotiate clarity anymore. That doesn't romanticize inconsistency. That doesn't stay where effort isn't mutual. That version of you is steady, present, and self-respecting. And seriousness recognizes seriousness. As this part settles, notice how little effort it takes to stay grounded now. Notice how you don't feel pulled in multiple directions. That's not accidental. That's growth stabilizing. If this message felt calm instead of dramatic, grounded instead of exciting, that's intentional. Real shifts don't need to impress you. They need to align with you. And if you continue with this series, it won't be because you're waiting for someone to reach out. It will be because you recognize when truth is approaching with weight, responsibility, and intention. Whatever comes next won't need interpretation. You'll feel it in the clarity of it. Stay present. Stay honest. Stay rooted. That's how serious things meet you now. There's a point where seriousness stops feeling like anticipation and starts feeling like inevitability. Not inevitability in a dramatic sense, but in a grounded one. The kind where you don't feel pulled forward anymore, yet you don't feel closed off either. You feel ready. Ready to meet whatever shows up without losing yourself in the process. This part begins there, because readiness is the quiet foundation underneath every real shift. What's happening now is not about whether your soulmate will reach out or how. It's about the internal alignment that's already taken place on both sides. Alignment doesn't rush toward outcomes. It steadies itself so that outcomes don't destabilize it. And that's the space you're standing in now. Your soulmate seriousness has moved beyond contemplation. Contemplation asks questions. This phase answers them privately. Not out loud. Not to anyone else. Privately, where truth can't be softened for appearance. They've stopped asking themselves whether reaching out is a good idea and started asking whether not reaching out is something they can live with. That's a very different question. When someone arrives there, it's no longer about desire. It's about integrity. About whether they can continue forward without addressing something that keeps resurfacing internally. And resurfacing doesn't mean emotional chaos. It means quiet consistency. The kind of inner nudge that doesn't go away no matter how busy life gets. They've tried moving on. They've tried reframing. They've tried convincing themselves that time alone would resolve what words never did. But time didn't erase it. It clarified it. And clarity doesn't allow avoidance to feel comfortable anymore. This doesn't mean they're rehearsing speeches or planning emotional confessions. Seriousness isn't theatrical. It's restrained. It's measured. It shows up as someone becoming more selective with their own actions, more intentional with their energy, more unwilling to live in contradiction. They're aware now that any reach, if it happens, can't be casual. It can't be vague. It can't be open-ended. Because they know who they're approaching. They know you're not standing in the same place you once were. You're not accessible in the old way. And that awareness changes everything. You may notice that your own emotional state feels surprisingly calm in the midst of all this. Not numb. Calm. You're not constantly checking your thoughts for signs. You're not preparing responses in advance. You're not oscillating between hope and detachment. You're simply living your life, grounded in your routines, your priorities, your inner stability. That calm didn't come from indifference. It came from self-respect settling into your nervous system. You've learned something crucial over time. You've learned that seriousness without clarity is just pressure. And you've also learned that clarity without consistency doesn't last. Those lessons didn't make you rigid. They made you discerning. So now, when you sense seriousness approaching, you don't rush to meet it halfway. You let it come to you fully formed. You trust that whatever is real won't require you to shrink, wait, or overinterpret. That trust is what makes this moment different from the past. Your soulmate feels that difference as well. They know that this isn't a space where half-effort will land softly. They're aware that if they speak, they'll be stepping into accountability, not comfort. Accountability doesn't guarantee acceptance. It guarantees honesty. And honesty is what they've been preparing themselves for. There's also something else happening beneath the surface. They're realizing that seriousness doesn't mean controlling the outcome. It means accepting responsibility for their part, regardless of how it's received. That's a mature realization, and it doesn't come easily. It requires letting go of the need to be understood immediately. Letting go of the hope that things will resolve neatly. Letting go of the idea that timing alone excuses silence. When someone reaches this point, they stop protecting their image and start protecting their integrity. That's the shift you're sensing. For you, the most important thing now is not to change how you're showing up. Don't soften. Don't harden. Don't prepare. Just remain exactly where you are. Present. Self-honoring. Observant without being guarded. You don't need to meet seriousness with intensity. You meet it with steadiness. If contact happens, you'll notice it in the quality, not the quantity. In how direct it feels. In how little ambiguity it carries. In how it doesn't ask you to guess what's meant. Serious reach respects clarity because it knows confusion is what caused the distance in the first place. And if contact doesn't happen yet, your life doesn't pause. You don't revert to waiting. You don't fill the space with meaning. You let things unfold because you trust your footing now. That trust is not passive. It's grounded power. You might find yourself reflecting less on what they're thinking and more on how you feel in your own body. That shift is subtle, but it's profound. It means your center of gravity has returned to you. And when your center is stable, whatever approaches has to approach you honestly. Your soulmate seriousness isn't meant to disrupt your peace. If anything, it's meant to meet it. If it can't meet it, it won't last. And you're okay with that. That acceptance doesn't come from resignation. It comes from clarity. You've reached a place where you don't need outcomes to validate your growth. You don't need answers to feel secure. You don't need certainty to trust yourself. Those are signs that something inside you has matured beyond dependency. That maturity creates space for real connection, but it also filters out what can't sustain itself. This part of the story isn't about tension building toward a reveal. It's about tension dissolving into readiness. Readiness to listen without losing yourself. Readiness to respond without overextending. Readiness to walk away if clarity isn't present. That readiness protects you no matter what unfolds next. You're no longer trying to control the narrative. You're allowing truth to reveal itself through action. And action, when it's serious, doesn't need embellishment. As this part settles, notice how little effort it takes to remain grounded now. Notice how you're not pulled by imagination or fear. That's not accidental. That's alignment doing its work quietly. If this message felt steady, almost plain in its honesty, that's intentional. Serious shifts don't need emotional fireworks. They need solidity. And if you continue with this series, it won't be because you're waiting for someone to reach out. It will be because you recognize what it feels like when something real is approaching with responsibility instead of impulse. Whatever comes next will meet you where you stand now. And where you stand now is strong, clear, and self-respecting. That's the only place seriousness can truly reach you. There's a moment when seriousness stops feeling external and starts feeling internal. Not something you're watching for, but something you're already prepared for. You realize you're not scanning your environment anymore. You're not checking emotional signals. You're not wondering what today might bring. You're simply living your life with a steadiness that doesn't depend on anyone else's movement. This part begins there, because that steadiness is what makes the next phase possible without costing you your peace. What's unfolding now is quieter than everything before it. Not because it's weaker, but because it's more resolved. Your soulmate has moved past the stage of wrestling with whether they should act. That inner debate has already happened. The emotional noise that once surrounded the situation has settled. What remains is a grounded awareness that something must be addressed, not to fix the past, but to stand honestly in the present. They're no longer trying to justify what happened. Justification is a form of avoidance. It keeps responsibility at arm's length. That pattern no longer works for them. They can feel the gap between who they've been and who they're trying to become, and that gap has become uncomfortable enough to demand integrity. Integrity is heavy. It doesn't rush. It doesn't soften itself for comfort. It asks someone to show up without knowing whether they'll be received. And that's the place your soulmate has arrived at internally. This isn't driven by longing. Longing is emotional and restless. This is driven by alignment. Alignment is calm and deliberate. It shows up when someone decides they'd rather live with the truth than continue carrying the quiet cost of avoidance. You may not feel excitement around this anymore, and that's important. Excitement often clouds judgment. What you feel instead is clarity. You know what you're willing to engage with and what you're not. You know what feels steady and what feels destabilizing. That knowing doesn't come from logic alone. It comes from experience settling into wisdom. You've lived long enough in emotional uncertainty to recognize when something is real by how it doesn't agitate you. Your soulmate senses this too. They're aware that you're no longer emotionally accessible in the old way. Not closed off, but grounded. Grounded people don't react the way they used to. They don't fill silence. They don't chase explanations. They don't adjust themselves to keep someone else comfortable. That awareness changes how someone approaches you. If they speak now, it won't be to test or provoke. It won't be to ease their conscience. It won't be to see if you're still available. It will be because they've accepted that honesty carries risk, and they're willing to carry it. That willingness didn't come easily. They had to confront parts of themselves that preferred distance over vulnerability. They had to admit that silence wasn't neutrality. It was a choice. And every choice leaves an imprint. Facing that truth isn't dramatic. It's sobering. It strips away excuses and leaves someone standing with themselves. That's not a place many people reach, and fewer stay in long enough to act from. You don't need to know the details of this process. You don't need to sense every shift. What matters is that you're no longer entangled in it. You're not carrying the emotional labor of wondering or waiting. You've returned to yourself fully. That return is what makes this moment safe. In the past, seriousness might have felt destabilizing because it threatened to reopen something unfinished. Now, seriousness feels neutral. You trust yourself enough to know that whatever happens, you won't lose your footing. You won't abandon your boundaries. You won't confuse clarity with closeness. That trust is quiet, but it's powerful. Your soulmate is also recognizing something important. That seriousness doesn't guarantee outcome. It guarantees alignment. They may not know how you'll respond. They may not know what the future holds. But they know that avoiding the truth any longer would mean betraying themselves. That's the shift you're sensing, even if you can't name it. This is not about reclaiming something that was lost. It's about honoring what was left unfinished in a way that doesn't distort the present. And honoring doesn't always mean continuation. Sometimes it means acknowledgement and release. Sometimes it means clarity without attachment. You're prepared for either. You may notice that your body feels calmer than your thoughts. That's because your nervous system trusts you now. It trusts that you won't stay in situations that drain you. It trusts that you'll speak when necessary and walk away when clarity isn't present. That trust creates a baseline of safety that doesn't depend on anyone else. And when you live from that baseline, whatever approaches you must do so honestly or not at all. Your soulmate seriousness is meeting that standard. Whether it translates into words soon or takes more time, it's already shaped by the reality that you are no longer the same person you once were. You're not available for ambiguity disguised as effort. You don't need to rehearse conversations. You don't need to imagine outcomes. You don't need to prepare emotionally. Preparation implies fear. You're not afraid anymore. You're aware. Awareness is calm. If contact comes, you'll recognize it not by the emotional charge, but by the groundedness of it. It won't pull you out of yourself. It won't demand immediate reassurance. It will respect the space you occupy now. And if contact doesn't come, you don't regress. You don't question your worth. You don't reinterpret silence. You continue living from alignment, knowing that seriousness that never becomes action isn't seriousness at all. Either way, you're not losing anything. This part of the journey isn't suspenseful. It's stabilizing. It's the point where you stop orienting yourself around potential and start orienting yourself around truth. And truth doesn't need constant attention. It holds its shape on its own. You've reached a place where you can receive clarity without clinging to it. Where you can hear honesty without needing it to lead somewhere specific. Where you can engage without overextending. That's not emotional distance. That's emotional maturity. As this part settles, notice how grounded you feel compared to earlier chapters. Notice how little effort it takes to remain present. Notice how your life continues regardless of what anyone else chooses to do. That's not indifference. That's self-respect fully embodied. If this message felt steady instead of intense, grounded instead of emotional, that's intentional. The deepest shifts don't shake you. They anchor you. And if you continue with this series, it won't be because you're waiting for a message to arrive. It will be because you recognize the sound of truth when it approaches quietly, carrying responsibility instead of urgency. Whatever comes next will meet you as you are now. Centered. Clear. And no longer available for anything less than honesty. There is a moment when you realize nothing is unresolved anymore, even if no conversation ever happened. It doesn't arrive as relief. It arrives as certainty. The kind that doesn't need reassurance to stay intact. You're not replaying scenarios in your head. You're not wondering how things might turn out. You're simply aware that whatever was meant to reach you has already done so in the only way that mattered. This ending doesn't come with answers shouted out loud. It comes with your nervous system finally settling. You notice it in small ways. You sleep differently. You breathe deeper. You stop checking emotional doors that stayed closed for too long. And one day it hits you that you're no longer waiting for permission to move forward. That's when you know it's over, not because something ended, but because you've outgrown the need for it to continue. You didn't lose anything here. That's the part that becomes clear only at the end. You didn't lose love, timing, or opportunity. What you gained was discernment. You learned how it feels when connection is real but not ready. You learned how much ambiguity costs when it stretches on too long. And most importantly, you learned the exact moment when patience stops being noble and starts being self-abandonment. That lesson changed you. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a way others immediately notice. But in the way you now stand in your own life without leaning. You don't reach forward emotionally anymore. You don't hold space hoping someone else will finally step into it. You don't soften your boundaries preemptively to make something easier for another person. You simply remain where you are. This is where true closure lives. Closure isn't a conversation. It isn't an apology. It isn't someone finally saying the right words. Closure is when your body stops bracing. When your heart no longer prepares itself for disappointment. When the story no longer needs to be retold in your mind to make sense of it. You reached that place quietly. The connection that brought you here did its work. It showed you how deeply you can feel. How sincerely you can care. How long you can stay open without losing bitterness. And then it showed you something even more important. It showed you your limit. The place where self-respect becomes non-negotiable.
The limit is scared. You honored it without making noise, without ultimates, without burning bridges. You didn't demand clarity from someone who couldn't offer it. That choice rewired you. Now, when you move through life, you do so differently. You don't confuse intensity with truth. You don't mistake emotional distance for mystery. You don't wait in silence hoping someone will finally choose you. And deciding feels naturally now, not forced. If your soulmate reached out, it won't shake you. You won't panic or romanticize it. You will listen. You will notice. If they have never reached out, nothing inside you collapses. You don't spiral to doubt. You don't rewrite history to make it hurt less. You accept the truth exactly as it is. Some connection awaken us. Both are valid. This ending isn't about reunion or separation. It's about sovereignty. You have reclaimed your emotional center. You are no longer awaiting someone else's readiness, fear, or timing. Your life is no longer paused in anticipation. You are living. And living feels different now. Quieter, cleaner, less dramatic, more honest. You choose peace faster. That's not detachment, that's maturity. You didn't become less loving, you became more selective with where your love goes. You didn't lose softness, you learned where softness is safe. You didn't stop believing in depth, you stopped paying for it with confusion. That shift protects you. The future doesn't feel intimidating anymore because you are not approaching it from lack. You are not waiting to be complete by someone else's decision. Whatever comes next will meet you on steady ground, not urgency, not longing, not unresolved energy, steady, grounded. This is why nothing here needs a dramatic finish. There is no cliffhanger, no final reveal, no message you are still waiting to receive. You already received the only one that mattered. It told you who are when you stop abandoning yourself. Sit with that. If this ending feels calm instead of emotional, grounded instead of exciting, that's intentional. This story wasn't meant to be hype you. It was meant to return you to yourself. And if you stay connected to message like this, if aren't because you are researching for sign anymore, it will be because you recognize the truth. When it speaks quietly and doesn't need to convince you, you are not at the edge of anything now. You are standing fully inside your own life, and that's where everything real finally finds you. I hope you like this video. I hope you enjoy this video. If you enjoy, drop a like, comment to this video, and subscribe to this channel for more epic and best story.